Welcome today. Today we're going to cover what is overhead in profit in construction. So being a contractor, you got to know your costs, you got to know what your overhead is, you got to know what your profit goals are. And if you don't, it's like being in the dark, trying to do a job bid with no clue how much to charge. I know you go to workshops and seminars and they tell you to use 20%, 15, 30. Those don't work. It's what works for you. So I've got a client, he called me up and said, hey, I'm marking up my jobs at 20%. I'm not making any money. What should I do? I said, well, what do you think you should do? Let's start with figuring out what you think your overhead is. Do you know what your annual overhead costs are? Overhead is your general and administrative costs. Costs to keep your doors open with no work under construction. It includes no field costs, no subcontractor costs, no labor and equipment. Just your overhead, your president, your staff, your administration, your estimator, your rent, your software, all that kind of stuff. That's your nut. So remember the old circus came to town on a horse and buggy and they had a nut. The sheriff would take the nut and put it in the jail until they covered the nut. That was their overhead. They had to crack the nut. Then they give them the nut back so they could make some profit and get out of town. So first thing you got to know is what's your nut. And I'm telling this guy, if you don't even know how much money you need to make to cover your overhead, and then we got to set some profit goals. How much money do you want to make? And he says, 15%. I said, of what? 15% of what? And he goes, well, 15% of sales. I go, what if your sales go down to $1,000? You're going to make $12? Is that what you want? He goes, no. I want to make 15% of what? So you got to have first thing you got to know is how much your overhead is. Is it 300 grand a year? Is it $1 million a year? Is it $5 million a year? What is it? I've got a client I just worked with yesterday. His overhead's $367,000 for the year. I had a client I worked with 3 days ago. His overhead's $4,752,000 per year to cover his nut. Then, of course, we have to add job costs, and then we got to have a profit goal. So define overhead. Overhead is everything it takes to keep your doors open with nothing under construction. So that would be yourself as the president or owner of the company. That would be your administrative team. Maybe you got an office manager. Maybe you got an accounting manager, a controller, a financial bookkeeper. Maybe there's a payroll clerk. Maybe you've got a couple of junior assistants that help the project managers. Then, of course, we have the estimator and all the marketing and sales. That's what it takes. And then you've got all your software. You've got your equipment for yourself and your team in the office. And so you add all that up, and that's your overhead. You also have to have a budget in there for your lawyer. And, of course, for me, your business coach. And all those add up to whatever it is. So step one, what's your annual overhead? So if we divide that by your annual sales, that'll give you a percentage that you can use to mark up your jobs. Actually, as a margin. We'll figure out margin versus markup in a little bit. So the next thing we want to figure out is what's your profit. Profit is what's left over after you pay all your overhead, all your job costs, collect all your revenue, and that's a net amount, return on investment, return on overhead, return on equity. You made a return on your work, your hard work. So profit is a return on taking risk. You're making a risky decision to start a construction business or to continue on, and you're going to invest $1 million in overhead. I better get a return on my investment. So I need to have a return. So how do you calculate that? You have to decide in advance on January 1st, how much return do you want to make? What would be a good profit for you in dollars, not in percentages, in dollars. You got to think in dollars. So let me see. My overhead's $1 million. How much do I want to? I'm going to make $500,000. So I want my net profit at $500,000, my overhead at $1 million. So that's $1.5 million in direct overhead and profit costs. Profit's not a cost, but that's the goal for you. That's what you want. You don't want to make 15%. You want to make $1.5 million, and that'll cover your overhead and profit. And then we go out and generate revenue to match. So we can do enough revenue to generate the overhead and profit after we pay our job costs. So think about, let's do a little example here. We're going to bid a job. The job cost is $1,000. Sorry, my handwriting's a little off. The overhead at 15% would be $150 if you're going to use percentages. and you're going to try to make 10%, which would be another $100. So what have you done here? You're going to bid this job at $1,250. So you've got your job cost first. We always start with our job cost. Then we're going to add our overhead goal of 15%. Now we'll cover how to track your return on overhead and create your what I call the 12-step formula to always make a profit. I'm going to follow up this video with another one to walk you through the formula. But we're going to have $150 in overhead. That'll pro rata share pay for part of your overhead. Your salary, your team, your staff, nobody out in the field. Everybody in the field is job cost. So then we have a profit goal. We want to make $100 on this job. So we're going to bid it at $1,250,000. So what is the markup? We mark up cost. You don't mark up sales. Contractors mark up cost. So I'm going to mark up $1,000 in cost with 25%, $250. So my markup is 25% on cost. So that includes overhead and profit. Okay, simple? So whenever you get confused, margin versus markup, think about what's my cost, how much markup to cover my overhead and profit equals my bid. So now, if you're bidding a job, can you cut your overhead? No. Can you cut your job costs? Not really. You can think you can, but you cannot. What's the only variable in here? The only variable is your profit. That's the only variable you have when you're determining your job cost and you're determining your overhead and profit. Think about how much money you want to make for the year. Think about what your annual overhead is. Now, I see a lot of people using QuickBooks or a lower price, not fully integrated software, and they call it cost of goods sold. Well, that's a manufacturing term or a donut shop term. If I'm a retail, I've got goods and I sell them, and then I've got my overhead. So we don't use the word cost of goods sold. We use job cost. That's the key. So I want you to set up your P&L with job cost, and then we got our overhead, which is our G&A, general and administration expenses, which contractors call overhead. And then we've got our profit. That's how much money you want to have. Taxable income. I know nobody wants to pay taxes. I get calls on, how can I reduce my taxes? Well, do you want the honest answer or do you want to cheat? You either do it right or you don't do it. So that's the point I want you to think about, okay? So if your revenue is $1 million, your job costs are $850,000, your overhead's whatever it is, we can figure out our annual, and then we can divide to figure out our markups. Okay? So I'm going to cover how to set this all up, how to do the formula to make a profit on our next video. But for now, I'm going to offer you a very special gift which will help you get started on this process. I've got a website called contractorprofitcalculator.com, contractorprofitcalculator.com, and I've got a workbook on there for you to use, an Excel workbook that you can enter the formulas to figure out your overhead and profit. And that is called 12-Step Formula to Always Make a Profit. So when you go on that site, you click on that, you'll get a download, and you'll also get a free copy of my new book, which will be out any day. I've just finished it. Should be at Amazon soon, but by the time you get this video, it'll be up. And it's called Turn Your Construction Business into a Profit-Making Machine. So look for that, look for the website, and hope to see you someday. And my goal is to find you someday checking out all your big money at the bank, okay? See you at the bank. Thanks.